Here's one from Jean Ritchie's sister. Jean Ritchie was our primary source of folk songs over the years. She's known as a primary source in traditional folk music, and she died about 6.5 years ago. She was the youngest of 14 in a family from eastern Kentucky. They called themselves the Singing Family of the Cumberlands, and they knew hundreds of folk songs. And this was one of them. This was from her sister Edna, and we knew Edna for a few years as well.
Yep. 1, 2, 3.
just have certain sort of promo bio type lines that work very well, but I say that I play traditional American and Celtic folk music and dance. I sometimes qualify that by saying Anglo-Celtic American folk music and dance, or Anglo-Celtic African American folk music and dance. I try to remember to give a nod to some of the roots of it, because I want to make sure I don't leave anyone out or act like there's only one way to be American. So traditional American folk music and dance. And then sometimes I say percussive dance, and Elwood and I do circle, square, and contra dance. And I'm a freestyle flat-foot clogger. So there's lots of little variations on that, but the short answer is traditional American folk music and dance.
That's a very broad category, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like the woman who knows too much. Like I know that can mean a lot of things. And so I'm a little bit cautious with it sometimes, but that's what I call it. And then if you want to go to the question number 2, how do you describe your family's background?
Yeah.
I actually come from a historically well-to-do and quote-unquote prominent families in Europe and New England, and with a legacy of wealth and what I refer to as American aristocracy that started to deconstruct mid-20th century. But my father's generation, they were raised, I don't know if you ever read about the Newport mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, but like the Gilded Age.
I've heard about that sort of thing.
The Gilded Age is a HBO series right now that I'm watching. It's kind of like Downton Abbey, if that was anything that you ever knew about. So that's the way the generations prior to me were raised. And then it kind of fell apart partly before I was born, but I was raised with the vestiges of those values, and I was sent to private schools and things like that. So the musical background of my family was therefore classical and not folk music. Folk music tends to be associated with people of the working and middle classes. And so when I was young and learning folk music, some of my relatives were up in arms about it. They were very unhappy with me for playing the guitar and singing folk songs. But I was born in the 60s and came of age in the 70s and 80s. And so I just kind of did what I wanted to do. But I had some opposition at first, and then they got used to it, and then they became really proud of me, and they love it. And then some of the folks that were my opposers have died. They were my grandparents or my father and mother, but my parents were very proud and loved what I did. So it was an interesting, what I did ended up making them have to change a little bit and open up their minds to what is acceptable music. And dancing too. We did not take dance lessons as children. Like tap dance was considered quote unquote low class. And so for me to become a clogger and wear tap shoes was a stretch too. But I just did whatever I wanted to, and people came around and accepted it. So, and that actually helps answer number 3 a little bit. What was my childhood like? And just as an aside, kind of personal, one of the reasons I was able to break down some of those family values and rules was that my parents were each married 3 times by the time I was 22 years old. So my family had fallen apart and fractured in such a way that was weirdly liberating, and I was able to do whatever I wanted. And I did, and I played the music I wanted, and I married Elwood, who was from a unacceptable family, and then everybody got used to Elwood, and everybody loves Elwood now. But so I challenged some of those family values that I was raised with, and did different things. Some of it was the stuff of crossing boundaries in society that we see a lot in ballads. So some of those ballad stories I can really relate to, because a lot of those stories have to do with the rules and regulations of society, and somebody's challenging them in the stories.
I imagine going to private school and then going down to Kentucky and learning the banjo and everything. That must have been quite a difference from what you were used to seeing in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing was the private school I went to in high school had incredibly great values for me. It was a Quaker school. So if you know anything about Quakerism and the history of Quakerism and abolitionism and social justice, it was kind of funny that my family sent me to this school, and they didn't even really agree with the values, but it was a really good school. So I ended up taking on those kinds of values, social justice, and getting to know people of all walks of life. So yeah, that's cool. That was a great school. I was really lucky. And then I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and again, some really fun people to hang out with. And I did a fair amount in terms of social justice and political activism, which can be and is often associated with certain eras of folk music. I started playing by ear at a young age. I started playing a nursery rhyme, Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, on the piano when I was about 5. And my relatives realized, my parents realized I had the gift of music. My mother's side, they were very musical. My grandparents were beautiful classical musicians and renowned and publicly performing. And so I started taking piano lessons. And that I took classical piano for 7 years, and when I got to be a teenager, I didn't like it, and I quit. And I had a lot of opposition. The family was not happy with me for quitting, but I did it anyway. And then I started playing guitar and singing. And then what led me into old time music? So again, talking about the family deconstructing. My mom married somebody, quote unquote, outside of the historically acceptable circles. She married a guy who was Irish American. And when I was young, my family was prejudiced. The family culture was prejudiced against certain groups of people, like Irish people or Italian people or Portuguese people who were American immigrants. And so it all started to fall apart in a good way as I was growing up. And my mom, when I was 16, she married a guy who's Irish American, and they were interested in visiting Ireland, and they ended up buying a house in Ireland, and we had a family home there for 15 years in my 20s and 30s. And so that was largely how I started really getting into traditional folk music. I had, in college with my friends playing guitar, I had started to learn some traditional folk songs. But I got into Irish music because we went to Ireland so much. Really nice, if I do say so myself, really tasteful Irish singers like Mary Black and Dolores Kane, Daidonan, and these just beautiful singers. Maura O'Connell. I don't know if you've heard of any of them. They're probably in
Some of them sound vaguely familiar.
Yeah. So, and then once I was in Ireland circa 1991, maybe, and I was reading this book on the migration of the music to America, to the New World, and then back to Ireland, and then back to America, and then back to Ireland, and the bouncing of the music. And that's when I read about Jean Ritchie, and I'd already heard of her. I read about Jean Ritchie coming to Ireland, Scotland, and England for 18 months on a Fulbright scholarship to explore her own family songs, the roots, the Scots-Irish and Anglo roots of her 300 plus songs from her family. And so I started getting really interested in Jean Ritchie, and I was like, the Celtic roots of American folk music, that really, really piqued my curiosity. So I started to get into that. I read her book, The Singing Family of the Cumberlands. Have you ever heard of that book?
I've heard of it, and I've been meaning to read it, but I haven't gotten to it quite yet. Yeah.
It's a beautiful book. And she was a wonderful writer. She was a scholar. She was a keeper of her family songs. Jean was a very brilliant woman with a very brilliant mind. And she also had a way of writing nostalgically. So you read that book and you're like, I want to be a Ritchie family member. I want to live on the farm with the Richies. I want to sing those songs. And in that book, there's all these songs just woven into it. So you learn about like when they sang, what songs they sang when they were hoeing in the garden versus on the porch at night or in church or rocking a baby to sleep, that sort of thing. So by then I had met my husband, Elwood. We were involved with a coffee house here in Providence, Rhode Island, which back then it was not a place that like made espresso and pastries so much as a church basement social hall that hosted a concert series once a week from September to May. This was the kind of thing that Pete Seeger got started decades ago, and it just a thing where people would have like folk performers coming through and they'd host them in a space like a church social hall. So we were attending that like every Saturday night. I just gotta pull this shade, hold on. So we learned a lot about all the great musicians touring at the time, local, regional, national, and international. And so 1992, I had read Jean's book, and then I heard about this event in Hindman, Kentucky. I read about it in Sing Out magazine. I don't know if you've heard of that magazine, but that was a magazine that Pete Seeger started decades ago, I think probably in the 50s. Great magazine. And there's just this little ad that said Appalachian Family Folk Week, the Hindman Settlement School, Hindman, Kentucky, Gene Ritchie, and others. And I was like, I'm going. And I don't know what possessed me to do that, because we each had day jobs. We were playing a lot of music, and we had 3 kids. And so I was able to make it happen. I was able to carve out 10 days, and I drove down there. I just wrote an article on this for the Dulcimer Club in England called the Nonesuch Dulcimer Club. And I start the article by saying that my Nissan Sentra only broke down once on the way down. It was like 875 miles or something like that. And I went by myself. I had traveled a lot ever since I was a teenager by myself, so I was pretty savvy. And I met Gene Ritchie down there. She was there for a week. And so for years, after that first year, I was invited actually to be on staff at that event. So for like 25 years, we were all together. Other Ritchie family members were always there. This is right in that region in eastern Kentucky where the Ritchies grew up. They had a family cabin there in Viper, Kentucky, and Gene brought me over there that first year in that Nissan Sentra that going up a hill. So I think we're like on question number 8 at this point. How did meeting her influence my dulcimer playing? And what was Gene like as a friend and mentor? And I had another mentor here in Boston kind of prepare me for meeting Gene, which was nice. And ever since 1992, I have just been observing and studying Gene Ritchie and her music and the music of the family. I'm just endlessly interested in that. It feels like my own family music. The people feel like my own family. And I think maybe you feel this way too, Matt, that you just really connect with these people and it feels like home. So we keep in touch with some of the nieces and nephews and cousins. We're very good friends with some of the Ritchie family members, and we keep in touch with them regularly. They come to visit us in Rhode Island. Sometimes we go to Berea, Kentucky and see them, that sort of thing. How did Jean influence my dulcimer playing? I've just observed what she's done all these years, and I've kept her old style alive. And I use the dulcimer as a harmony voice, which is a very special way that she played. You know what? You want me to do a song?
Yeah. Wait, have you had a dulcimer on your lap this entire time and I just didn't notice?
Yeah.
That is, wow.
Some people wear jewelry. I wear a dulcimer.
I heard it a minute ago, but I thought you built the one beside you. I didn't think you had that one.
Yeah, I was just teaching a lesson, so.
Oh, wow.
So I'll play you Pretty Sarah, which is one of my favorite Ritchie family songs.
Please do. I'd love that.
There are lots
You
of
read my mind. I was going to ask you if you could.
Oh, good. Okay. And you'll see me play with the traditional noter, which is how you play. I loved your piece that you
Thank you.
on your YouTube clip. And I don't use I tried using a feather once, and I'm sort of like I use heavy strings. I'm kind of like kind of player, so I pretty much shredded the feather right away. But,
I noticed you have a lot of pickware there on that dulcimer.
Oh yeah. And I just had this dulcimer refurbished, so this is this is it looking all spiffy. I had it refretted and refurbished because it was really, I've played this dulcimer constantly for about 30 years. Down in some lone valley, in a lonesome place, where the wild birds do whistle, and their notes do increase. Farewell, pretty Sarah, I bid you adieu, and I'll dream of pretty Sarah wherever I go. My love, she won't have me, so I understand. She wants a freeholder who owns house and land. I cannot maintain her with silver and gold, nor buy all the fine things that a big house can hold. If I were a merchant and you'd write a fine hand, I'd write my love a letter that she'd understand. I'd write it by the river where the waters overflow, and I'll dream of pretty Sarah wherever I go. Oh, I'll dream of pretty Sarah wherever I go. So that's like a perfect example of a Ritchie family song. It's Scots-Irish, Celtic in origin. It, in some version of itself, came over with some of the Ritchies and other folks in the 1700s. It is likely about an indentured servant who's too poor and uneducated to be a suitable match for the woman he loves, and he's probably being blocked or prevented from being with her. And so it's about class differences, it's about educational differences, it's about longing, pining. and I think it has beautiful poetry. And then you get into the dulcimer, which Gene's father, who was born in the 1860s, he played the dulcimer. And so I have two really old dulcimers that I can show you. That it's the type of dulcimer that would have been played by Gene Ritchie and the Ritchie family. This is from Jethro Ambergy. In the 1950s, it was made in Hindman, Kentucky. And you can see the fret wire is just over the double string, the double melody. So the Ritchies played with the noter. They played in different tunings and modes and had drones. And this instrument is only less than 200 years old. It evolved from the German pioneer instrument into this and got its hourglass shape, it's thought, in Kentucky, somewhere probably in the 19th century. And so at one point I was playing harmony on the dulcimer while I was singing melody. And to get back to answering a question, how did meeting Gene influence my dulcimer playing? That's one of the coolest things I got from her. The idea of playing that old style. I play lots of other techniques and styles on the dulcimer, but I play the old way that the Ritchies played. And sometimes people seek me out specifically so that I can show them how to do that. Play with the noter, play in different tunings. I play in many, many different tunings on the dulcimer, and I use the dulcimer as a harmony voice. During the pandemic, I even had a guy from the Philippines, a dulcimer player, want to learn that technique. And then he translated some Ritchie family songs into his language. It was beautiful. He's a really good musician. The delving into old-time American folk music is just an endlessly delightful way to learn about history and people, the migrations of people, the human experience, history, how history repeats itself. And so for whatever reason, I'm very fortunate that I really found my thing, because I have just been having a ball for decades now. And I get to do this for my job, and people ask, kind of like what's happened to you, like you can get course credit for doing something you really love. And I constantly get asked to do things that I'm really excited about, and people pay me to. I'm like, okay, great. And
it's incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible. And I became a full-time musician after I went to Hindman that year in 1992. I was 28 years old. I was a teacher by day, and I taught adult literacy in Providence. And I really liked that work, but I just couldn't do everything. So I quit my day job back then, and I became a full-time musician in 1993. And I never did that starving artist joke. Like, you know, sometimes people are on stage, they're like, you know, we make dozens of dollars a year, or they make a joke about how little they get paid, because we got paid well. We were very successful. Elwood and I both have good heads for business, and we did well. We live in a part of the United States where there's just tons of gigs, and we have lots of different niches. We work with children. We play in old folks' homes. We do public concerts. We do we do dances. We do all kinds of things. And a lot of the wellspring of material and the role modeling that we got was in Hindman, Kentucky at Appalachian Folk Week. That's where I saw people sort of like do it all. There's people that I know that play multiple instruments. They dance, they call dances, they write songs, they research traditional songs. And then Elwood and I started doing all of that and just loved it. So when I went to Hindman that year to meet Gene, unbeknownst to me, I actually met some of my best friends that year, and we've all been friends for 30 years and collaborating artistically in terms of the music and the dance. So that brings us approximately to question number 10. And this was such a cool question, Matt, because again, this was one of those questions I'm like, you really know stuff here. Gene and George seem to embrace technology and advancements, and I mention that a lot in my workshops on Gene Ritchie and the Ritchie family. Her husband, George, was a lovely, delightful man. We loved him, George Pickow. And he died in 2010. And before that, he uploaded tons of stuff of hers on YouTube. And you probably know this. Like if you want to find a Gene Ritchie song, you just go on YouTube and type in the title. And
yeah, that was one of my first introductions to Gene Ritchie was going through his channel.
Yeah. Yeah. How much stuff is on his channel?
I think there are maybe 20 videos or so. Okay. I think he started it a year or two before he died, maybe.
Yeah. So then maybe other people. Yeah, I haven't totally paid attention, so that might be not.
Nobody's posted on it since 2009,
yeah.
So I don't think anyone.
So there are other ways in which entire records of hers are on YouTube, as you probably know. And maybe it was not George that did all that, or maybe, I don't know, it might have been their son, John Pickow, who died last year, and Oscar Brand, who had the distinction of a world record of running the longest running radio show. So Oscar Brand, do you know who that was? Do you recognize?
Again, sounds familiar, but
and again,
you're giving me a bunch of ideas for stuff to look up after this.
I know. So yeah, look up Oscar Brand, because he was a musician and he did records with Gene, and he was their best friend. And he lived to be really old. He just died like a couple of years ago in his upper 90s. And he ran the same radio show in New York City for like 60 years or something outrageous like that. So maybe between him and John Pickow, I'm not really sure, but Gene's all over YouTube. So George was a photographer, a filmmaker. He did record album covers for people, and he had a really great career himself. He was a really progressive man, and they were a great couple. He was very supportive of Gene and the kind of fame that she had. And they really bolstered each other. It was a very interesting couple. And so they were and continue to be a very good role model for me and my husband. My husband's kind of similar. I'm the more well-known one. I am in the limelight a lot, and he's very supportive of me. And very proud. And Gene's husband, George, had a fantastic career of his own, but he was not as famous. And he was okay with that. He was like, when they got really old and they were failing and sick, we went to visit them once. They were both still alive. Gene had a stroke. And George, we got to the house and there were like flowers and cards everywhere for Gene. And George is like, I'm sick too. Nobody's sending me hundreds of, so it was really cute. He had a sense of humor even back then. So,
and they had their own record label, didn't they?
Yes. Green Haze record label. And you mentioned Mudcat. I mean, I was recently doing some research on a song called The World Is Old that I do radio work as well with Ozark Highlands Radio, and I created like a 7-minute segment on that song, and I thought it was like some ancient shepherd's carol. Well, it was written circa 1910 or 1913. I have the information on it. I found this thread on Mudcat, and Gene Ritchie, her handle was KY Trad on Mudcat. And she wrote into the group and said, I'm trying to find out more information about The World Is Old tonight. And she talked about it a little bit. And somebody wrote in and said, I believe Gene Ritchie covered that on her Kentucky Christmas album. And then somebody else writes in and says, psst, KY Trad is Gene Ritchie. And so I went down this lovely rabbit hole and really got to the bottom of that research. That was really fun to research. I found out the deal with that song. So having said that, I was emailing Gene in the late 90s and in early 2000s. So Gene and George were open-minded and savvy about technology, and they were always moving with the times. So they were some of the earliest emailers as well. So that's a little bit on Gene and George seem to embrace technology and advancements.
And there's something that I forgot to put in the question list, but it makes sense to mention it now. Weren't you one of the first musical groups on the internet or something like that?
Yeah, we had, and we still keep in touch with him. He's younger than I am, but one of my Brown University fellow students, he was a fan from the get-go, like when we started playing in 1987, and he created a website on us so early in website making that we didn't even see it for a long time. And it had this crazy address, like URL. And I think it was like somewhere like in the early 90s, I think somewhere in the 90s we had a website. And then it morphed into atwaterdonnelly.com, and then we redesigned it. But we've had a website for probably close to 30 years, something like that. That's a good question. I used to know when that first was. But it was, I think, it was before I did email, for sure. The dulcimers George built for Gene, I haven't paid as much attention to those dulcimers as I could. And they were very traditional dulcimers, meaning they were not a huge stretch from these. Like, I bet the early dulcimers that it was George and his uncle Morris Pickow. They were making dulcimers under one of the Brooklyn bridges. They had like a luthier shop under one of the Brooklyn bridges, and they were making some traditional dulcimers. And I think that was infusing the folk music world with the instruments, because Gene, you can single-handedly credit Gene with introducing the dulcimer to the folk music world. You can go through the links of people to figure out how they first came to play a dulcimer, like Richard and Mimi Farina. Richard Farina played the dulcimer. He met Gene at a party in New York City. That's how he first saw a dulcimer. And then other people, like this woman out in California, saw Richard Farina play the dulcimer, and then she started making them, and then Joni Mitchell picked up a dulcimer at a fair made by this woman, that sort of thing. So there are all these cool ways you can sort of trace back, like all dulcimers point back, and players point back to Gene, or many of them point back to Gene. Because she really got
something
around.
Really special that it points back to one person. Very rarely can you take like a tradition such as the dulcimer and pinpoint it back to just one person starting most of the revival.
Yeah. One thing that I realized, I'm a student of Jean Ritchie's life and her music and her family music, and she had a long life. She lived to be in her 90s, and there's always stuff I don't know, or stuff that I think I know and then I find out not quite accurate. So the premise that just about every dulcimer player you can link back to Gene, there's a lot of truth to that, but there were people making dulcimers like in Hindman, Kentucky prior to Gene coming to New York City in 1947, but Gene is the one that started to infuse it into the folk revival that was happening in New York City in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the Greenwich Village scene, Pete Seeger and the Almanac Singers and the Weavers. And I don't know how much of this is ringing a bell for you, because
Pete Seeger definitely is.
Yeah, you know a lot for your age and stage, and it's fantastic. And it's exciting to think about. You have a lifetime to steep yourself in this and enjoy learning about it.
I've been having a blast so far, and I love that you can never run out of things to look into.
It's unbelievable. And the topics that I cover, I don't know if you looked at my website, the Ozark Highlands Radio Project, but I think there's 32 or 42 topics there, and they're like 7-minute long segments, but they're really dense, and each one would take me like 10 hours to research, but I just would enjoy it. And I'd go down the rabbit hole of the internet and listen to all these different songs and stuff like that on topics like Jean Ritchie, the life and work of Jean Ritchie, yodeling, work songs, and all kinds of subjects. The Bessie Jones and the Georgia Sea Island Singers and stuff like that. So, okay, let me see. Did George and his uncle Morris do a lot to advance the design and construction of the instrument? I would I would say no to that. That their dulcimers were fairly traditional, and that it was the people that got the dulcimers from them, and the idea to play the dulcimer from Jean. Then they started building them and playing them differently. And a lot of guitar players got their hands on dulcimers and started to do stuff like instead of playing with the note or like that, they started playing with chords and then finger picking over here and doing stuff that it was more modern and more like the guitar and other folk instruments. Jean did not play for equally distant strings. She was a real stickler for keeping things the way her family did it. She was a stickler for singing the songs the way her family sang them, with the way the words were and the melody. And she would be corrective with people. And she was a stickler for playing the dulcimer the old-fashioned way that she learned from her father. So she never really went beyond the playing with the noter. Sometimes she didn't fully finger pick. She'd just be like, she'd just kind of like this thumb thing. I
play like that a lot of the time too.
It's very pretty, and she had a very unique way of using the dulcimer as a harmony voice. Very distinctive, different. Like I did it for Pretty Sarah, but very different than she did it, and she did it on minor songs too, which was really cool.
Didn't you say? I heard you say at one point that doing it on minor stuff is really tricky compared to doing it with major stuff.
I think it's a lot harder to find a really decent harmony part. And she played in Dorian a lot, which was a little bit of a different type of minor scale than Aeolian, which is the one that's more prevalent in general American music. So that's a great question about the 4 equidistant strings. I like you said, yes, I'm getting nerdy with some of these questions.
I couldn't resist throwing that in because I knew that, nobody would ask that usually, but just because it was asked to me a few days ago and I knew I was going to do this.
And as far as preferences with noters, I think she just basically used a round, I like a sawed piece of dowel that's like a half. And I think she just used a round dowel. Her picks were really different than the kind of picks I use. Like I like a medium-sized triangle pick, and she would cut out a big triangle from a coffee can lid, and it was really flimsy, but that was her preference. Something about Jean that people may find surprising, maybe what I said about her being a real stickler, and every now and then she'd really pounce on somebody for like quote unquote not singing or playing the song right and kind of crush you. And then she would sort of apologize later. So that was, I try to be careful. I don't want to say anything negative, but I actually liked that humanity about Jean, because who's perfect? And before I ever met her, one of my other mentors, a dulcimer mentor, gave me the heads up that she could be like that. And that was fantastic preparation, because I was not caught off guard when I did see her do that. And it was not for many years that she jumped on me like that. I watched her do it to some other people, tended to be people that were more like from Kentucky and from her background. And I think she left me alone because I was from so far off that, and also I was very actively performing. But one time I sang a song and she didn't like it. And she jumped all over.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was called Come and I Will Sing You. And it was a variant of Green Grow the Rushes, which the Ritchie family had a couple of versions of that, I think. One of those cumulative type songs. And she did not like the way I sang it. She said I sang it too fast, and I was like crushed. My feelings were really hurt. And then later she just came up to me and apologized, and that was really sweet. And we were very good friends. I mean, we'd say we love each other and that sort of thing. So she was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump all over you. I love you. And I was like, that's okay. But the intent behind that was that she was a steward of the music, and and she was trying to keep it alive and intact in a way.
I admire that integrity and wanting to preserve things the way that they were.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had that conversation for many years with people about what is traditional, and I never use the word pure in describing the music I play, because traditional, weirdly, in American folk music is defined by change. Like, there's no spot on the timeline you can quite point to and say, that's the definitive version of Pretty Sorrow. That song has been sung by many people over centuries. So who's the boss of the exact version of that song? You can say, well, one definitive version would be how Gene Ritchie sang it, say, in 1950 or something like that. Maybe Alan Lomax recorded her in New York, but then 20 years later, she sang it a little differently and played the dulcimer instead of singing it a cappella. So that's a hard thing for a lot of students and lovers of traditional American folk music to wrap their minds around. You have to really think for yourself, because there's not quite an exact version of anything.
I think it took me a while to get used to that ambiguity when I was studying this stuff, or when I started getting into it. I felt like I had to play exactly like the recording I was learning from, and as time went on, I gradually became more okay with varying things and changing it a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a real type of maturity as an artist, I think, to be able to live with that dis or unease.
Yeah.
Because you're like if you're learning something from a source, like let's say Old Joe Clark from some source, the way that musician played it in 1964 was just on that day. And they might have made a mistake with one of the notes, but then everybody learns it that way.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with some of what we call crooked tunes in American folk music. Sometimes people just learned it crooked because they learned it from a really old person who like maybe made a mistake or skipped a part or skipped a beat. And then that became like the version of it. So that stuff just fascinates me to no end.
Speaking of Old Joe Clark, I wanted to ask you, you're one of the few old-time players I've seen play the F chord, and I always thought that was more of a bluegrass thing. Where did you... Okay. That was just... I don't have a source for that, obviously, but I was just curious, where did you pick it up to play it with the F chord?
I learned Old Joe Clark in Hindman, Kentucky, from my friend Carrie, who taught me banjo. I'm going to play banjo a little bit.
Please do. I'd love it.
Old Joe Clark is a really good example of a Mixolydian melody, and I'll explain what that means. So the traditional key, if you're going to play it in an old-time dance with fiddlers, would be A. A Mixolydian. Let me show you. So Mixolydian means it's kind of like the regular major scale, but it has a flattened seventh tone. And that's what gives it the Old Joe Clarkiness. If it was regular major, Old Joe Clark would sound like this. So that F chord is the flattened tone, and that's why it's so distinctive. So I don't associate that with bluegrass. I associate that F with the quote-unquote true, I'm not going to say pure, the true nature of the melody of Old Joe Clark. That the reason that F chord really stands out is because it's a surprise. We're expecting an F sharp there. say I'm capoed too, so I'm actually an A, and that's actually a G chord.
Would you mind maybe doing that and singing a few verses of it, possibly?
Sing a couple verses. Yeah, let me find some that are decent out of my book. Oh, you know what? I learned this. Actually, let me play you a little bit of. It was Daryl Scott that wrote a cool new set of lyrics. 20.
I think I've heard you do this.
Yeah, let me do a couple of them. Is that okay to do that, or do you want some?
Oh yeah, I'd love it, and I love hearing you play Red Haired Boy too, so that works out.
Okay. Something's vibrating. It was the button on my shirt.
Oh, you love when stuff buzzes. I usually do foot percussion on that too, and I can talk about that a little later too, or show you. Or I was gonna ask, didn't you learn that the same time you met Gene Ritchie?
That's that version of that song.
No, I mean the foot.
Oh yeah, yep.
So that trip was really life changing for you.
Oh,
you met
absolutely.
Gene and that.
That trip in 1992 when I went to Heinemann, like I said, I met some of my best friends and mentors all at once, and that that week-long event became this incredible wellspring. I learned my first clogging steps. I learned my first clawhammer banjo tune. I met Jean, and I just started to learn a lot of that repertoire. And I learned Old Joe Clark right off the bat from my friend Carrie Norris, whose grandmother was Lily Mae Ledford, and she's somebody else to look up if you haven't already heard of her.
I've heard of her.
Yeah, the Coon Creek Girls. And so I learned, again, talking about a chain of people. I learned from Carrie, who learned the music of her parents and her grandmother. And so I learned Old Joe Clark, and then I heard Sam Bush do that version of Old Joe Clark, which Daryl Scott had written those words. It's such a beautiful and heartbreaking narrative in that song, and a really important one, I think, to remind us that the banjo was an African instrument and that it was appropriated by white people throughout history, and that in the last couple decades there's been a black banjo movement for people to reclaim the instrument. And I had a black woman in a banjo class I just taught the other day, and she shared with me that there was a lot of shame associated for her and her family with the banjo, and that she's been enjoying reclaiming it. So that's pretty cool.
The whole time we've been talking, I've been looking at that minstrel banjo behind you, actually.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you ever play that?
I would need to add a string.
Oh, well.
So I can't really play anything on it right now. I can show it to you. I can play one string. And it's fretless, and it's got Nile gut strings. But a friend of mine gave this to me, and I could certainly string it up and play it. I just haven't. Did Jean realize how big of a deal she was? That's a good question. I don't know. She had a really incredible career. She produced so many books and albums, and she was in demand. I knew her at the end of her life. She was 69 when I met her, so I knew her for the last 23 years of her life. And she was well recognized. She was well loved in the folk music world. People loved being around her. And when she would walk into a room to do a performance, it was powerful. It was a powerful feeling. She was a very beautiful woman. She had that beautiful red hair, long red hair all her life. Right up to the end, she still had her red hair. It was tinged with white, but still a lot of red in it. And she'd wear these big, beautiful dresses, these long dresses. And she was just, she had kind of a beautiful elegance about her. And when she'd come into the room, it's like the weather changed to this cool feeling. So that was really nice. Howie Mitchell is a fan of my music, and have I had much contact with him? And yes, I think it might have been after I performed with Gene Ritchie in 1999 at the Central Ohio Folk Festival. That was one of my favorite gigs of my whole career.
I wish I'd been there.
Yeah, it was. I did about an hour set before Gene went on, and there were 600 people or so in the audience. And I always loved playing in Ohio and in the Midwest. I got up there and I said one thing, and everybody just started laughing. I live in New England, where people are palpably more reserved in public, and so I'm used to that, and I'm completely comfortable with my people in New England. I come from a very reserved family. And I mean, the pandemic did a lot of my relatives a favor. Nobody has to hug. They're like really happy about that. But so I was out in Columbus, Ohio, and the minute I said something, everybody laughed. And I just was off and running, and I had the best time. So, and then Jean did her set after that. And I just remember people, it was thrilling for me as a young performer. People were standing in line to buy my books and CDs and get my autograph. And I was like, I could enjoy riding on the coattails of Gene Ritchie's career. Thank you very much. This was really fun. So that was a really fun memory. And Jean would often read excerpts from her book, The Singing Family of the Cumberlands, in her performances or workshop sessions and then play songs. And it was just always a very powerful combination. And I think one of her sisters had just died. And I don't know whether it was Edna or somebody else. Edna was the one sibling I knew. And so it was, I just remember in a workshop at another time during that event, if I'm remembering correctly, if it was that event, it was also very emotional. So I just remember that. She always showed her humanity in a very lovely way. And Howie Mitchell, I'm pretty sure, was there. And I got a really cool, beautiful letter from him after I got home. And he and I corresponded through letters, old-fashioned way, through letters for a number of years. And Howie always figured into the dulcimer history as a pretty important figure. He, right after Gene, created records on how to play the dulcimer and the hammered dulcimer, I'm pretty sure, and also how to make them. And he did records with Folk Legacy Records. And so Howie also, he developed a style, like I mentioned, there were the players that came after Gene. Like maybe it was Gene that he got his first dulcimer from. I wanna say probably. So let me just show you an example. So I'm retuning to D-A-D-D. So Gene played with a noter. And then Howie, being slightly younger and more innovative, coming into the dulcimer as a guitar player from outside of Appalachia, he would play what's called chord melody. And so he'd play chords in such a way that you can also hear the melody. Etc. So you're changing the tradition of the dulcimer because you no longer have the drones in there. You have chords, which is more modern. And so that's an example of like I play all the ways. So it was really a high compliment to be recognized by Howie and to get those letters from him and to correspond. And question number 21, do I have any other mentors I'd like to highlight? I'll think about that, but there are many, many people that have been incredible role models to me. Pete Seeger is one of my greatest heroes of all time, and we got to play with him twice while he was alive. And I loved his single-minded and unwavering politics. And single-minded is not the right word. His true north, his moral compass, I'm really amazed by him. And I did make a study of his life as well. And a lot of, I would look to a lot of females. One of the interesting things about Jean Ritchie is she was so unique as a woman. You just cannot list very many women of her generation who had the kind of folk singing career that she had. They're just not, it's primarily men. And so that she had such a unique life. And again, her husband, George, just supported her. He was a modern, progressive, innovative man, and he had no problem with supporting her as an equal partner. So lots and lots of role models and mentors out there. I never knew Joni Mitchell personally, but she's always been a beacon and one of the greatest geniuses of all time in music history. And she, for many people my age, many women my age, she was an incredible role model. She's alive still, but not actively performing. So those are some of the people that pop into mind. When and how did you get started teaching? I've been teaching the dulcimer since the 90s, and I play entirely by ear. So bit by bit, I have slowly unpacked what I'm doing and learned how to transcribe it so that I can teach with multiple modalities when I conduct workshops. I have written transcriptions of what I'm doing, and I play it so people can hear it, and I show how I'm playing it so they can see it. And I even talk about how it feels, the kinesthetic, the physical part of being a musician, the athleticism of being a musician. But I was a teacher of literacy before I taught dulcimer, dance, banjo, singing. So I was able to sort of use some of the things I had learned teaching people who had learning differences and maybe didn't speak English as a first language. Is very, very handy background to have. A lot of the interesting and quirky things I have done in recent decades is because I opened up my email box and there was some interesting invitation. I mean, YouTube has done me some fantastic favors because I'm out there. I've been out there on YouTube for 16 or 17 years. So I got invited. It was because another banjo player, Stephen Wade, was going to do this residency in London. The guy, it was in American schools in London. The guy was a folk music enthusiast and a banjo enthusiast. So he was going to have Stephen Wade come, and then Stephen couldn't do it. And then he found me. And I think it's because of my website, Matt.
Oh, wow.
That was in the 90s. I went in 98 and 99, and it's because I had a website. He looked on the internet and found me. And then I got a phone call, or I think it was by email. I got an email inviting me to come to work in 3 different American schools in the London area to talk about American history, American folk music, and its links to Elizabethan England and English, Anglo history. And I went twice, and then he wanted to make an album. And then they dropped me like a hot potato. I made the album. They were going to have creative control over it. And then some of the people at the school, and this is getting into that early part of my conversation about class differences, and some of the people at this rather expensive private American school didn't really like the folk music or the subject matter in it, and they dropped the project. And then guess what? I got to keep it. So, and it's mine. So after I got over
I'd say that you won out on that one.
I know. I mean, it kind of hurt my feelings at first. And I'm like, oh, part of the reason they wanted to drop it is because one of the songs I had on it, because I did the project with little kids all the way up to high school. And I was doing this song that was from feudal England about the marriage of 2 families, the uniting of 2 families through a marriage. And the boy was like 14 and the woman was like 24. And that's just a true story in feudal England.
The trees, they do grow high.
Yeah,
right?
the trees, they do grow high, exactly. And I guess they got really creeped out by that, given the things that we deal with and talk about in modern society. I mean, that's always been a thing. But that was one of the reasons I think they just didn't like the project, because some of the subject matter in those songs, which I was just doing a cross-section of songs that I thought were appropriate for the subject matter, and that was the one I was singing with high school students. It was just factual, like if you study the kings and queens of England, or some of them were like child brides or whatever. But anyway, yeah, that's a little bit on that. And then I got to call it what I wanted. I actually named the album after a lyric from that song, because it was called Live in the Classroom, but I called the album Daily Growing.
I'm just now realizing that.
Yeah.
That was clever.
Which I think is a really cool 2 words, Daily Growing.
I didn't realize you did it all the way up through high schoolers.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what the age of the audience was, or, was it one show? Was it several? It
was quite a few shows and programs. They recorded it all on a mini disc player, which was like this kind of fleeting technology that I used briefly in the 90s, and then we made an album out of it. Yeah. So it was like kindergarten kids all the way up to seniors in high school.
I think this leads me to one of the questions. You've done a lot of school programs. Do you notice a difference in how the different age groups receive this stuff?
Absolutely.
I'm thinking if I was in high school, I would be thrilled to see you, but I don't know what some of my classmates would be.
Yeah. We have different swaths of repertoire for every age. And I actually am a therapeutic musician at the Children's Hospital here in Providence, Rhode Island. So I'm used to like practically code switching instantly with different people as far as what I play and how I present it. So I play everything from little baby songs all the way up to grown-up songs. And once we get into adolescence, I just treat them like they're grown-ups. I don't play just any old songs. Like, I don't deal with really dicey material, but we haven't done school programs during the pandemic, obviously, but the way we've dealt with adolescence is we bring in subject material that might be interesting to them. Like just recently, I learned a song about a 19th century lighthouse keeper that was a female, and she was 15 when she started doing it. We get mixed reviews from adolescent audiences, and it's fun when we win them over because we'll show up and we're all set up. And my husband and I are both very friendly, and we really like people of all ages. I'm not daunted at all by adolescents. I just talk to them like they're regular people. and so I try to relate what we do to popular culture, and I'll ask them questions like, what did they listen to? Or if I do some of my freestyle flatfoot clogging, I might mention that some of the steps are the same as hip hop steps or modern dance forms, that sort of thing. And so sometimes kids will leave the assembly program and they loved it. And they were just like, okay, that was different. And some of them were like, well, it was kind of weird, but I liked it. For some of them, it's so far off from anything they've ever seen before that I love exposing kids to that. Historically, we've done this one program every other year in Rhode Island where kids are invited from, the public schools are invited, and schools from all over Rhode Island. So we've had audiences of several thousand, and they're an adolescent audience. And then we do questions and answers, and we get some really wild questions, but they love it. And I love modeling quite a few things. I like modeling a married couple performing together. I like modeling a strong and confident woman. I like modeling dancing, and we've sometimes had as many as 9 performers, and several of them are guys and girls dancing. So they see like male tap dancers. And so we're just modeling all this crazy stuff. And we're also modeling that we are making our living as artists. And so we have this very well-developed program for adolescents, and it even includes a study guide and study questions and things like that. So that's the thing about being a decades-long full-time performer of traditional music and dance. We've got so many different programs that are fully developed. Very cool. So
it must be nice to just be able to go back and pull whatever program you feel like doing.
Yeah. And when I'm in the Children's Hospital and I find myself bedside with a sick adolescent, I have certain things I do with them. I either sing them songs that are more for grown-ups, or I have them play the dulcimer. And not too long ago, the girl was 12. She was about to have surgery, and I go into surgical services pre-op, and I play music with kids before they're going to have surgery, which sounds really weird, but it's this incredible thing to do. Because they're hungry, they're nervous, they're cold because they have the Johnny thing on. And so we play music for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I had this kid just instantly playing the dulcimer, and her father was playing like this miniature steel drum that I have. And I like left them alone for 5 or 10 minutes, and they were playing a song. It was really cool. And then the doctors and nurses are looking at me like, what is happening right now? This is very cool. What's happening? So, I like working with people of all ages and also very elderly people. Just now that I'm older, I'm in my late 50s, I just see the the boy or the girl that this elderly person once was, this person, the younger person, and I just talk to them like a regular person and get their stories and things like that. What aspect of teaching do you find most challenging, most rewarding? I love teaching, and I teach people of all ages. I think challenging is trying to reach a diverse group of learners. And one of the hard things about being up in the public eye and being a performer is the occasional criticism that's unkind. And that's gonna happen no matter what. I have ways of protecting myself from that. I don't read comments on YouTube videos and things like that, because sometimes they're unkind or cruel, and people just say whacked out things because they're anonymous. And so I have to deal with that sometimes. And that's that we're all very sensitive creatures, and that's hard to, so I just have ways of ignoring or protecting myself from those kinds of comments. But the most rewarding part is the connections with people. I mean, even this virtual thing I just did last weekend, I got so many nice emails and notes from people and really cute comments. Like, my husband and I were emceeing one of the virtual concerts, and this person sent me a picture of us. It was a picture of us on the screen, and her cat was watching us.
That's funny.
And I was telling you, I did a joke in between every act, and she said, "I think my cat really liked your great personalities."
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
So anyway, I would say 99% of the time, the folk music world is a very kind, warm community. So we really feel at home in the folk music world, and in all the teaching we do, the idea of passing the traditions on, passing on the music, the knowledge I have about Gene Ritchie, all those great songs, all the technique I've developed. Elwood and I are master musicians and dancers in all these different ways. We learned from a whole variety of people. Like, you asked about mentors and role models, and I am just like a composite of hundreds of people that I have observed and learned from. So, the changes in the dulcimer have to do with, it seems like in the dulcimer circuit in the last 30 years, a lot of people just play in D, but Gene Ritchie did not just play in D. She moved those keys around a little bit. The dulcimer has a reputation of being easy to play, and there's truth to that. That's the one instrument I know how to teach anybody immediately. Like, I can boil them cabbages down or something like that.
That's the first thing I learned.
Yeah. But it is endlessly fascinating. So it's like the perfect instrument, because you can play it immediately, but then you can spend 30 years and not get tired of it. That's how I feel about it. So, what drew me to the banjo and how did I go about learning it? I mentioned that I started learning it years ago. I just, how some people just like the banjo. Some people don't like the banjo. Some people.
I don't understand those people, but
right. The banjo is the butt of a lot of jokes, as are accordions, bagpipes, and in the classical world, the viola. But I started learning the banjo on that very, very important week of my life in June.
That week changed pretty much everything.
Yeah, it changed everything. We just had, like, the friend who taught me my first clogging steps, he and his wife just came to visit from Kentucky.
Oh, wow.
2 weeks ago. We were going to meet in Florida, and then Omicron and flights being disrupted, we decided to cancel the trip, and they just drove here for about 5 days. It was great. Was I nervous about how the old timers might accept me? I mentioned coming from that type of American aristocracy. My great-grandparents in the 19th century and into the 20th century made a fortune off of coal and timber and shipping and other commodities. And coal was a big thing. My father was from a New England family, but he was born in Bluefield, West Virginia in 1920 because they owned and operated coal mines. And they supplied coal to the textile mills of New England. So they got very, very wealthy. My father grew up in a mansion with servants and chauffeurs and gardeners and cooks, and that was in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And then things started to deconstruct mid 20th century, but I had a kind of shame around that. And then I finally told one of the longtime mentors at Folk Week. He died last year, Lee Sexton.
Oh yeah, I've heard him.
You might have heard that name. Yeah. Nora Brown, the banjo player Nora Brown, got to spend time with him and learn from him. And I remember telling Lee Sexton, he was a coal miner for like 40 years, and he had black lung, and I told him something about my own family history, and he just didn't care. Like, it's not that black and white. Like, people don't care, you know. Yeah. It's like he just saw me and he knew me for years, and he and his wife loved all of us, and we loved them, and we would hang out with them and hear him play, and he'd share his music with us and teach us, and so that was a really important lesson to get over myself, that I'm not that important. And it's not about me.
When did your family start accepting the fact that you were performing this? And I know there was that initial resistance, but did it ever die down, or how did that?
Yeah. Pretty quickly. Like, I mean, not to brag, but I think because I showed talent and success right away, I was performing. I started to perform when I was like 18.
Wow.
And that's just like 3 years after starting to learn. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, by the time I was 18 or 19, I was publicly performing. And then developing all these scholarly programs. My father was a museum curator. He was a nautical historian. And I realized my family has quite a few curators, and I realized I became a curator too. I curate this music and the dance. And so I think my father really loved the scholarly part and the narration and stuff like that. So, and my mom's alive still, and she's like one of our biggest fans. You know, she loves our music. Yeah. So, let me see what else. Misconceptions. Humor is very important to me as far as teaching, presenting concerts and programs, and just general social discourse. I think of humor as a form of affection and a way of putting people at ease. And I will say that my family growing up had a great sense of humor, and my husband is one of the funniest people alive. So we have a lot of humor in our lives, and I think it's a lovely way to connect with people. So that's why when I saw the jokes that you had on your Facebook page, I'm like, okay, here's a kindred spirit right here. Yeah. I think it's not totally a coincidence, since we're both so interested in this particular music and dance, and not just the sound of it, but the whole huge backstory. I always say a single song has multiple stories. It has the narrative of the actual song itself, like Pretty Sarah, the words, and then it's got the cultural backstory. Where did it come from? Who sang it? How old is it? And what is it ultimately about in a bigger cultural context? And then the particular story, like of how did I first learn Pretty Sarah? I first heard Gene Ritchie sing it, that sort of thing. So there's lots of multiple backstories to all of this music. And question number 31, a lot of people are apprehensive to sing, and do I have any thoughts about this, and how do I encourage people to sing? I love that question, because my husband Elwood and I are very focused on vocals and singing, and we've had people look at us. One time I was sitting in church and somebody sat next to me and said, "Oh my God, I'm not going to sing if I'm sitting next to you." And I thought, okay, you don't know me at all. And I struggled with that reaction that some people have around me, because I sing professionally. They're nervous around me. And this storyteller named Doug Lipman finally gave me the language to say, anytime somebody says something like that to me, I turn to them and I say, I love to hear everyone sing. And I do. And I do not cringe if somebody's a little off key or they don't have like the best voice in the world. And I try to convey that message to people that I love to hear everyone sing. I want everyone to sing. I don't care if you don't have a perfect sounding voice. And when I have private students, I sometimes talk about the damage done to us and our voices. A lot of people have stories that when they were little, they were told, "Oh, honey, in the church choir, don't sing out loud. Just move your lips." And there are a lot of sort of damning stories that especially older adults have about childhood experiences of being literally told to shut down their voices. And some of the students I've had, to me, when I can get a shy person to sing in front of me, that is such a high compliment. It's an honor. And it's the human voice is the most personal of musical instruments. Very personal.
Yeah.
It is my voice. And if somebody makes a funny face or doesn't react well to the singing, that can really easily shut a person down. And so I am always very honored when people share. And some of the people that have taken lessons to me, it does not come easily for them. They cannot just belt it out. And so that's even more of a high compliment when they sing in front of me. Because I think there's a lot of shame and embarrassment associated with singing. I once had a kid in a middle school, after we did an assembly, raise his hand and ask me if I ever want to become a singer. Because he did not think I was famous, and therefore I was not a singer yet. And I was not in the pop music realm. What he was basically asking me was, do I ever want to be a famous pop singer? And I told him no. We've even been invited to be like on some of those talent shows like America's Got Talent and The Gong Show. We've been pursued by Hollywood a couple of times. They wanted us to come and be on those shows, and I just turned them down. I'm like, no. Especially, I think I was in my 50s when we got asked. I'm like, no, I have this great career and I like it just the way it is. And I'm not using folk music as some stepping stone to become famous. And so that was a really interesting question from that kid, because it showed his perception of how and if you can have a career singing. And it showed his perception that you can only have it one way. And that's one of the reasons we love going into schools and working with kids, because we hopefully show them that if you want to become a full-time musician, there are lots and lots of ways to have a career and make enough money. So that's pretty cool. I talked a little bit about how I met Elwood. Individual strengths that we bring to the duo. We play different instruments. Elwood is like the master harmonizer. He comes up with these great harmony parts. And we have this funny shtick a little bit with the stage presence. Like somebody was saying the other day, watching us MC, like Elwood is very funny and very quiet. And I do most of the talking, and then every now and then he comes out with something really funny. And you can tell he's just kind of sitting there taking it in. So people enjoy that dynamic that we have with each other. We're also very comfortable with each other. And we're a very happily married couple. We've been together for 35 years this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we've had our ups and downs. Everybody does. But we really genuinely like each other, and we've been working together for years. So I like to think that comes across on stage. I am the front person in the configurations. I do the biggest narration piece and the talking. I'm the glue. As you can see, I have no problem talking, and I put everything together. A lot of times we don't even use a pre-made set list. We just craft the show. We improvise the whole show as we go along with whatever songs come to my mind. So when we play as a trio with another member, she's okay with not using a set list. There's a fourth member that we would play with who was a little unnerved by it. But that's one of my favorite parts. That's a form of improvisation that I just love. It's not that I have no idea, but I have a subset in my mind, and I don't quite know what order we're going to do them in. And some of it depends on, in a live performance, what's going on in the audience. I'm looking at all the people, and something makes me think in my mind while I'm doing a song or a dance number, I'm thinking we're going to do such and such next. Also, it might have to do with like whatever tunings we're in. Like I do things in little groups of tunings. I did not consciously decide to be a professional musician until I became one. Like I did not think of doing that when I was younger. I ran with it. To balance family and touring has always been hard. And I care for my mother. She's in a nursing home, for example, and I've recently gone on a couple trips, and she's not well, and I wondered if she was going to die while I was gone. You know, things like that. And I'm kind of like her only person. So things like that are hard. And when our kids were younger, we didn't go far away until they got grown up. We didn't go far away unless we brought them with us. So the two younger ones, we made them be in a band with us for 5 years when they were teenagers. So
that's one way to solve that problem.
Right. And then sometimes I leave Elwood and do solo work, and he doesn't really like me to leave him. So on the other hand, sometimes it's nice to be apart for a week, and it's refreshing, and I like to be myself and that sort of thing. Niches in the career. I've mentioned some of the niches, but some niches in our career, and there are lots of them, and this is one of the reasons we've been so successful. All our work with children, my therapeutic work in the hospital. I have a psych degree, and my independent study in college was the hospitalized child play and music therapy. So that was a course that I cooked up, and that was really exciting. So we do like nursing homes and senior living places and assisted living. We do school programs. We do dances. We do public performances that are concerts. We do dulcimer festivals. We do banjo festivals. We do dance festivals. We do songwriting at times. We do singing events. It just goes on and on. So I would say we have like a dozen niches, and the biggest one for me is the mountain dulcimer circuit, and that's been really fun during the pandemic. And then we have a new niche where we can present on Zoom and other virtual platforms. It's mostly Zoom. So, and you're saying different roles. What's a favorite? One of my favorites is teaching and performing on the mountain dulcimer. Best, worst gigs. I did describe the one of the best was the Gene Ritchie, and some of the worst, some of the most tragic ones during the pandemic were, okay, so the gig was canceled. All the gigs were canceled in March. We had 25 gigs in March of 2020, and it was a wipeout. There's an example.
Wow, that's a lot of gigs.
And then we made up for some of them by doing them virtually. And then the virtual thing didn't work, like, because we were all learning, especially in the spring of 2020 into the summer. We just didn't know what the heck we were doing. So like we went to a library and it was just us in the pandemic and the tech people. And then they couldn't figure out how to get it streaming on Facebook. So it was just heartbreaking, but we have a lot of different stories. Long ago, we got booked in a bar to play traditional folk music, but the guy didn't understand that we did old-fashioned folk songs. He thought we were going to do like folk song, acoustic rock of the 70s or something. So he booted us out after the first set. We're like, okay. How much do we practice? That really varies over time. When I was young and learning banjo, for example, I was practicing an hour or two a day. during the pandemic, Elwood and I practice approximately 25 to 30 of our songs every week. We have this routine where we meet for about an hour, about 3 times a week, and run through about 10 songs. And that keeps us it's like making sure you jog every day. And then we also practice on our own a little bit. And then we teach and perform. So that's like what a person does who's older, who's been doing this forever, to sort of, it's like maintenance to keep our repertoire in shape. We have a couple hundred songs we can just do at any given time. Do we have a process with a new tune or song? It takes a long time. Like Elwood wrote a song at the end of the summer, and we take our time with it. We practice it a few times a week, and it takes weeks, possibly a couple months of that. I call it simmering in the crock pot of our mind. Like we just let it kind of bake, and that's really fun. So it takes a while, because we do everything entirely by ear, and it takes a while to bond with it, remember all the words, decide exactly what instrument, what arrangement, what instrumental work we're going to do on it. Definitely liking for seafaring songs. That's another niche thing you could say, that we have a whole bunch of different categories of songs we do. Like March is Women's History Month. I do images of women in traditional folk music, or we do seafaring songs, or we could do work songs, we could do protest songs, we could do songs we wrote. So we have all these, we do Christmas and winter holiday songs. We have all these different repertoires to where we can present like an hour or more program on all these different topics. So that's really fun. And I live, as I'm talking to you, I'm literally a block away from a working waterfront, boat building, fishing, restaurants. And my family has a history in sailing. My grandfather qualified for the Olympics in sailing, and a lot of fishing and sailing in our family, tons of fishing and sailing, and a lot of seafood. We all eat seafood. We all eat lobster. We all know how to cook the perfect lobster. In the summer during the pandemic, I go and I shellfish and I get clams, and we make dinner with clams and stuff like that. So I really like the seafaring songs, and we do a repertoire of folk songs from Rhode Island, and a lot of them are seafaring songs.
Speaking of seafaring songs, I think we're down to a few minutes. Would you mind doing Was It When I Was a Fair Maid?
Yes.
Possibly?
I mean, no, I would not mind. When I was a fair maid, about 17, I listed in the Navy for to serve the Queen. I listed in the Navy, sailor lad to stand, for to hear the cannons rattling and the music so grand, the music so grand, the music so grand, for to hear the cannons rattling and the music so grand. Well, the officer that listed me was a tall and handsome man. He said, "You'll be a sailor, so come along, my man." My waist being tall and slender, my fingers long and thin, and very soon they learned me. I soon exceeded them. I soon exceeded them. I soon exceeded them. Oh, very soon they learned me. I soon exceeded them. Well, they sent me to bunk, and they sent me to bed, to lie taking off my blue coat, sure often makes me smile. For to think I was a sailor and a maiden all the while, a maiden all the while, a maiden all the while. For to think I was a sailor and a maiden all the while. Then they sent me to London for to guard the tower, and I swear I might be there till my very dying hour. But a lady fell in love with me, I told her I was a maid, and she went into the captain, and my secret she betrayed. My secret she betrayed. My secret she betrayed. Oh, she went into the captain, and my secret she betrayed. And the captain, he came up to me and he asked if this were so. Oh, I dare not, I dare not, I dare not say no. It's a pity we should lose you, such a sailor lad you made. It's a pity we should lose you, such a handsome young maid, such a handsome young maid, a handsome young maid. It's a pity we should lose you, such a handsome young maid. So it's fare thee well, Captain, you've been so kind to me, and likewise to my shipmates, I'm sorry to part with thee. But if ever the Navy needs a lad, a sailor I'll remain. I'll take out my hat and feathers, and I'll run the rigging again. I'll run the rigging again. Run the rigging again. I'll take out my hat and feathers, and I'll run the rigging again. I'll run the rigging again. Run the rigging again. I'll take out my hat and feathers, and I'll run the rigging again. Such a great song. Feisty, feisty song.
No
So,
matter
yeah.
how many times I hear you play that, I never get tired of it.
Aw, thanks.
What advice would you give? I know this is a broad topic, but to younger musicians that are looking to get into this?
I think do the things you love the most, and it's a lot of work. And if you love it, you don't mind all the work. Like I just work. I love what I do. And when the pandemic shut everything down, I could really have changed my life a lot and done something else, because everything just shut down. It was like a reset. And I was like, no, I like this. So there's a lot of money to be made if you are a really good performer and you have a good head on your shoulders as far as business. And it's really worth it. And it's very possible to truly color outside the lines. I think we've all learned that in the pandemic. I think that anything's possible in a lot of ways. Oh, the springtime returns to the login again, and the lark sweetly sings o'er the green fertile plain. And I'll take the road that is dearest to me, the road to Drumlaumen that winds to the sea. For I've made many friends on every drum lowman that winds to the sea. Or we sat by the fire while the winter winds blew, and we laughed and we sang till the night was well through. And we had a good dram and a wee cup of tea on the road to Drumlaumen that winds to the sea. And the long summer days when we climbed the hills o'er to spend hours in the fields over Arran's wild shores. The soft summer twilight bids shadows to flee on the road to Drumlaumen that winds to the sea. These days passing swiftly bring changes, I know, and time marches on. From this place we must go, but I'll ever remember as the heart beats in